Before we get going, we're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to a subscriber that comments on this video, and for at least a while, we're going to be doing it on every video. So subscribe and comment on all of them. Would you believe that there's a lot of inventions out there that happened by accident? Shocking, I know. I'm Falcon, and today on Waste Time, 10 surprisingly accidental inventions. Number 10 is artificial sweetener, specifically saccharin? Wow, I've never said that out loud. And I probably never will again, for that matter. This specific artificial sweetener was actually found by a gentleman by the name of Konstantin Fahlberg. Now, Fahlberg was a bit of a badass. One time he drank bacteria that he said caused ulcers just to prove it. And the way artificial sweetener was discovered was actually very similar to that. After a day of work, he went home and, well, by gosh, by golly, ate a meal. That's what a lot of us do after work. And in that meal, he had a bread roll, which turned out to be a lot sweeter than he expected. He made sure the bread roll wasn't made to be sweet, and then came to the conclusion that he spilled a chemical on his hands at the lab, and because he didn't wash his hands, you know, like a savage, it ended up on his bread roll. Now, he wasn't sure which chemical it was that he got on himself, so he went back to the lab and he tasted all the chemicals he left on his desk, which is actually less insane than the drinking of the ulcer bacteria. Number 9 is the ice cream cone. Now, the invention itself wasn't a total accident. Originally, glass cups were used at ice cream vendors and people would walk off with them, they'd get broken, and vendors didn't really love this. So one vendor, an immigrant by the name of Italo Marchioni, sold ice cream on Wall Street and said, I need to come up with a better way. He came up with the waffle cone, something that he would prepare ahead of time and use instead of glass cups because really it didn't matter. People walked away with them. They were meant to eat them. The accident is actually how the ice cream cone became popularized. Marchioni was at an exhibition of various treats in St. Louis, Missouri, and ran out of waffle cones. And another vendor at that exhibition by the name of Ernest Hamwi was there for waffles, specifically a Syrian cookie waffle type hybrid thing. It was very thin and was actually a lot like waffle cones. Marchioni ran out of waffle cones, asked Hamwi if he could use his waffles, roll them into cones, and the spectacle gained a lot of attention. People tried the waffle cones. They're delicious because it's an ice cream cone, duh, and ice cream cones got really big. So yeah, ice cream cones, an actual American thing. Something we didn't just rip off from somebody else. I mean, that's ours. That happened here. Number 8 is Teflon. A gentleman by the name of Roy J. Plunkett was working on trying to find new refrigerants. You see, refrigerants were often poisoning people at the time, and it was an area that needed a lot of research. He produced a gas that he believed would do a good job, called tetrafluoroethylene, or TFE for short, and he put it in some containers, storing it at a temperature necessary to maintain dry ice. When he came back to it, there was no gas in it. It weighed the same amount, but instead there was a powder. The powder had very low friction and was very heat resistant, and he made the powder into a polymer and called it Teflon. And then you used it in frying pans without even thinking about it forever. Number 7 is matches. John Walker, a pharmacist, was trying to find a way to start fires easily. And not to burn down his pharmacy for insurance money, it's because they didn't have an easy way of getting fire. He would continually dip various chemicals into each other in order to start fire, and never found one that could actually transfer the fire to something that was flammable enough to hold it. One day he accidentally scraped the bottom of his hearth where he was doing his work to avoid risk of spreading fire in his house with a small stick that he had dipped in the mixture he was working on. That stick started on fire, and the fire transferred to the stick. He called this invention a friction light, just had people strike it on some sandpaper, and voila, fire. Number 6 is X-rays, and Willem Conrad Röntgen is the inventor of them. He was actually trying to figure out if electrons or cathode rays or something could pass through glass, but he found that they didn't really. But where he was attempting to do his experiment caused a glow. That glow was the result of them actually projecting a visible light when they were hit by X-rays. Now this one's a little bit confusing, but it can be boiled down specifically to this. He was trying to do one thing and found out another thing. X-rays are actually fairly difficult to understand exactly how they work, but softer material they pass through, harder material they don't. It took a really long time to figure out that it can cause cancer too if there's a lot of exposure, and that's why they're limited in usage, mostly to a single short exposure. Number 5 is Viagra, or less popularly known as Sildenafil, was being tested as a cardiovascular drug. in an attempt to help people with high blood pressure have lower blood pressure. But as they tested it, people who took the drug and experienced its effects in their lives, nudge nudge wink wink, know what I mean, didn't want to give up taking it. And let's be honest, people who were having trouble with erectile dysfunction like Bob Dole probably are pretty happy not to have that problem anymore. I'm Bob Dole and I need pills to have boners. Number 4 is Coca-Cola. Not necessarily the most useful invention of all time, but an accident. John Pemberton, a druggist in Atlanta, was injured in the Civil War and became a morphine addict. He essentially was trying to create a concoction that helped treat that. He used coca leaves, yes, where cocaine comes from, and tried to make a version of a French wine called Vin Mariani. He used Bordeaux wine, and the ethanol in that wine basically leached the cocaine out of the coca leaves, making Pemberton's French wine coca a pretty good stimulant and a means to get away from that morphine. When alcohol was outlawed, he had to come up with a different way of doing it, and eventually settled on a syrup and carbonated water combination with the cocaine in it. Also cola nuts, which are also a stimulant. They marketed it as a brain tonic. But really what they were doing was giving people a drink that resembled today's Coca-Cola, except it got you high as, well, you know, someone who uses cocaine. Number 3 is dynamite, which was actually created from a series of accidents. Alfred Nobel was searching for a way to stabilize nitroglycerin, which is, you know, just an explosive liquid. And the series of accidents was basically that nitroglycerin exploding, because when you add stuff to unstable explosive liquids, they tend to, you know, eventually explode. But the way he actually found to stabilize nitroglycerin was when he was transporting some of it. One of the cans he was transporting it in broke open and leaked. It leaked into the material that the cans were packed in, which was just a rock called, and I may be saying this wrong, but kieselguhr, which just absorbed the nitroglycerin entirely. After having found that it worked this way, he refined it and made it so that the kieselguhr didn't hinder the power of the nitroglycerin. He patented it, and that's dynamite. And then he put in his will that he wanted to make the Nobel Peace Prize to try to atone for the fact that he made dynamite and it killed a lot of people. Number 2 is LSD, which is not a commonly useful invention, but one culturally really well known. Between the hippie movement and the MK Ultra program, which is actually real, we should do a video about that at some point. The inventor was named Albert Hofmann, and he was just trying to find medically useful ergo-alkaloid derivatives, which are just chemicals. And one of the formulas he tested on some animals and they kind of went nuts. Nobody really understood it, obviously, and they shelved it for 5 years. This nagged Hofmann in the back of his head, though, and he had to go back to it, so 5 years later, they resumed experimentation on it. He accidentally ingested some of it, and you know what LSD does. That's what happened to him. So he intentionally ingested some in a very small amount, what he considered to be a trace amount that would be impossible to affect him, but that was not true. It affected him hard, and the rest is history. And finally, number 1 is penicillin. Alexander Fleming, a professor at St. Mary's Hospital in London, was sorting through petri dishes after being on vacation of various bacteria that caused boils and abscesses and sore throats. You know, fun stuff. The intent was not to find any kind of antibiotic, it was just to study a certain kind of bacteria. But he found that there was some mold growing in one of the petri dishes. For what reason, no one really knows. Maybe somebody dropped a crumb of food. But that mold had secreted a liquid that surrounded it, obviously, and bacteria couldn't grow anywhere near it. Away from it, bacteria grew just fine. He called it mold juice and set about from isolating it from the mold. When he published his findings, he actually barely even talked about penicillin and more talked about isolating penicillin-insensitive bacteria. Again, this was more about the bacteria than what could be done with penicillin. Fortunately, it stoked the interest in penicillin and people continued researching. Essentially, it's one of the biggest inventions of all time, and by the time he published his scientific findings on it, seemed to not really care about it very much, which is pretty amazing. Have you ever done something awesome accidentally? Leave a comment, and also if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you're not subscribed to Waste Time, now would be a great time to do so. We upload new videos all the time, and the best way to see them first is of course a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on Waste Time.